Eric has done his utmost to spare you. So have I.
Please, Grandma.
Ingrid. Eric wanted to save you from this profound humiliation and disappointment. But now you force me to tell you the truth. This Della Costa person is nothing but an adventurer, my child. See for yourself. You realize the kind of man he is?
I won't believe anything against him.
And I can only tell you that if you persist in going away with this man, you will wreck your whole life.
I love him and I'm going away with him.
Very well, my dear. You must go your own way. I shan't stop you by force. Remember that the doors of this house are never closed. Not even at night. I had to tell her.
But why?
She's got to grow up like the rest of us. Silly little fool. Where's my bag? Oh. Come. Let's get back to our guest. Dear Mr. Paderewski, I do hope you'll forgive me. I'm afraid I've been a very bad hostess.
I know you have been very anxious, but I hope all is well now.
I'm afraid not.
I just received this message. The aeroplane's ready. We can start almost at once.
Oh, no, you mustn't go. You can't leave us. We want you now more than ever.
Ingrid.
Ingrid.
Pittsburgh with Andre Previn and the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. Tonight's special program, the music of the great 20th century composer, Sergei Rachmaninoff, with guest artist, pianist Horacio Gutierrez. This Previn and the Pittsburgh special is made possible by grants from Allegheny International, the Gulf Oil Corporation, and H.J. Heinz Company. 3 international corporations dedicated to supporting the performing arts.
Those 3 notes aren't just famous, they're infamous. They are, of course, the beginning of the famous prelude in C-sharp minor by Rachmaninoff. And although tonight's program is about Rachmaninoff and his music, that's all you're going to hear of that particular piece. Those 3 notes I just struggled through are it for that particular work of Rachmaninoff's, and I suppose that that piece of news would have pleased Rachmaninoff extremely if he heard it, because he hated the piece. He was plagued and hunted and haunted by it all his life. He wrote it when he was only 19 years old, and its fame pursued him for the rest of his illustrious career. Indeed, it was almost impossible for him to, at any one of, I suppose, thousands of recitals, not to end the recital by giving that prelude as the final encore. It got so bad for him, quite seriously, that he used to tease the audience. At the end of a concert, he would say from the stage, "Must I?" Or he'd say, I can't remember anything else. And the response to that was always that the audience would start shouting out the prelude in C-sharp minor. Toward the end of his career, he resorted to walking off stage and then requesting that a stagehand come out on stage and actually close the lid of the piano, thus signifying rather clearly, you must admit, that he was not about to oblige. One of the reasons he was so bothered by the success of the prelude is that he felt, quite rightly, that after he wrote that prelude, he also wrote a vast amount of wonderful and idiomatic piano literature, which he felt had been passed over in the favor of that one very early piece. Also, on quite another level, he was torn not in 2, but into 3 parts of his genius. He was a very great interpreter, he was a wonderful composer, and a very sought-after conductor. As a pianist, the critics exhausted every superlative in their vocabulary. As a conductor, he was once offered the music directorship of the Boston Symphony, and as a composer, he conquered the musical world, even though some of his pieces got an initially surprisingly cool reception. Yet despite all that talent, or I suppose maybe because of it, Rachmaninoff was always beset by nervousness and anxiety that threatened to paralyze him artistically. At one point, he even had to go through a hypnotic cure by a famous analyst of the day, a Dr. Dahl, so that he could recover sufficiently from these bouts of depression in order to go on composing. And his most famous piano concerto, the second piano concerto, is indeed dedicated to Dr. Dahl. All of Rachmaninoff's works have huge melodies. Now, most of them are sad and dark and depict the popular idea of the Russian soul. A lot of his melodies have a great deal of sardonic humor. He was also very influenced by Orthodox choral music, and he used the Western Church's plain chant, the Dies Irae, in more than 20 of his compositions, which you must admit is a lot. You know the one I mean? This... And that's all over his compositions in one guise or another. But the aspect which communicated itself most strongly to his audiences was his unflagging and sensuous and honest romanticism. His most popular concerto, as I say, the second one, is filled with tunes which have become indelible on the minds of music lovers everywhere, and which, by the way, have been imitated by lesser composers endlessly. All these imitators wrote the way he wrote for cynical reasons, and Rachmaninoff was totally honest in his choice of musical expression. It was the way he felt and the way he had to compose. He said something once that I quite love. He said, "I hear the music in my head, and when I stop hearing it, I write it down." wonderfully simple way. I wish I could hear things like that. No outside influences made their mark on him. No musical trends or fashions or advancements, if you want to call them that, or milestones affected the way he wrote. Let me give you an example. For instance, he wrote his famous Second Symphony in 1908. Now here's one of these tunes. Now, 4 years after he wrote that tune, Stravinsky revolutionized music forever by writing this. And 7 years after that, Bartók wrote this. Well now, Rachmaninoff obviously heard all these pieces, as well as all the music of the revolutionaries of the day, Schoenberg, Alban Berg, Prokofiev, Varese, what have you. So, what did he write 15 years after that little excerpt of Bartók's that you just heard? Here's what he wrote. So you can see he was not about to allow himself to be too influenced. Now, if you are a Rachmaninoff denigrator, and there are those, then you can say that his music is old-fashioned, démodé, naive. But the truth is actually very far from that. He wrote the way his soul, the soul of a very great musician, dictated. And he couldn't betray it, and he wouldn't betray it. Which brings me to the piece that you are finally going to hear in its entirety tonight, his third piano concerto. It's the piano concerto that has fascinated all the pianists of the world the most of all of his concerti. Now, almost nothing is written about the third piano concerto in his own hand, which nobody seems to know quite the reason why there isn't, and it's particularly curious since he was very fond of writing down his problems. He wrote letters about his work and his family and his health, and very often about money, because he had very frankly admitted expensive tastes. Let me read you another excerpt of a letter. He says, "What is not consoling is that I'm going to have to go to America after all. I think I'd even give up my secretary if I could get out of going there. That's how much I don't want to go. But then, perhaps, after America, I'll be able to buy myself that automobile. So it may not be so bad." Well, I hope he got his automobile, and I hope that if that's the way he wanted it, I hope it was made of solid gold, because he deserves it. Rachmaninoff played the world premiere of his third piano concerto in New York in 1909. Played it with the New York Symphony Orchestra, which was then conducted by Walter Damrosch. And 6 weeks later, to the largest audience of that season, he repeated the piece with the New York Philharmonic under no less a conductor than Gustav Mahler. Now, last night, after the performance of this piece, I had an informal talk with our soloist, the brilliant young pianist, Horacio Gutierrez. Now, this is a piece that I mean, as a pianist, you know that you can't cheat in this piece. Mm-hmm. And you are one of the handful of people that really play all the notes. Now, that's not a joke.
Not every time.
All the time. Say nothing. Say nothing. No. But I remember Ashkenazi, with whom I recorded this piece. He said to me, this is one of those pieces where it's so much work to play all the notes that by the time you get all the notes, an enormous amount of time has gone by and you don't even know what the music is yet, which is very good, you know. And it is extraordinary how many notes. I know that sounds simplistic and silly, but I can't think of a piece that technically, never mind musically or in terms of profundity, but I don't know another piece that's this difficult. Yeah?
The Rachmaninoff, people have asked, well, what's the difference between playing the Rachmaninoff third, let's say, and the Brahms second? And besides what you said about the enormous amount of music, of notes, of textures, I mean, you know, everything is so thick, and you have to make it flow and have make sense. There is also an emotional ingredient that this piece takes, as well as endurance, that I don't think any other concerto that I know of requires the same. I mean, other pieces you play, for example, the Brahms second, or which is also a gigantic piece, as you know, but yet you feel at the end of it that you get something in return, because for one thing, the orchestra has this enormous tutis. You feel like you're part of a symphony. The Rachmaninoff, the feeling is that you give everything. And you get from the audience, of course, because if they like it, it's a wonderful piece for the audience and for oneself as a pianist. But emotionally, at the end of it, you're drained. I mean, you don't feel the uplift that you do with other music. You just feel, you know.
Tell me something, we were talking about technique before, and you showed me, you read me, you have a book there.
Yes.
Of Rachmaninoff, quotes, and he talked about technique. Read that, because I think it's amusing. It's nice.
Well, I was reading this, and I thought it was wonderful, because, as you know, we always worry, being pianists, about our fingers and our elbows and our arms and our shoulders, and we're always, besides the music, we have to deal with an instrument that's not part of us, it's not the voice. And such a great giant as Rachmaninoff, when I read this letter that he wrote to a friend, I thought it was so amusing that I wanted to show it to you. And it says here, this is a letter to a friend. It says, my vacation ends with my departure from here. In France, I shall again sit down at the piano and at the exercises for the fourth and fifth fingers. About 5 years ago, Hoffman told me that our second finger is the lazy one. I fixed my attention on this finger and began to check it. Soon I noticed that the third finger has the same fault. And now, the longer I live, the more I am convinced that both the fourth and fifth work in bad faith. Only the thumb remains honest, and that only temporarily. So I have begun to look at him too with suspicion. I have 3 weeks to get ready.
That's nice. So nothing works.
No, that's right.
Oh, right.
That's always the case.
I must say that this is certainly not going to turn into a diatribe against critics, but people who look down on Rachmaninoff and say, oh, well, the only reaction I have is that I feel sorry for him.
That's right.
Because it's very, very beautiful music, and I think that as long as there are pianists and conductors and orchestras, they'll always play it.
And if they could write better, I'd like to see it.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Horacio Gutierrez.